Welcome, everybody. We're going to invite you to find your favorite seat, or if someone took your favorite seat, well, I'm sorry, but there's still wonderful seats here still left for you. So there's still a couple over here if we need that. There's a couple over here as well. We're quite full on the seats there, but we do have backup chairs. This is good. And those, we're welcoming our live stream people. Hi. We already know that there's people watching right now. And so it's very exciting to be hybrid. Now we do know, sorry, those who are streaming, it is best in person, but we do appreciate that you're here. So your love is still sent to the screen. We know that. Though we're doing more romance today, I'm not sure what kind of love we have going on today. But my name, if you didn't know, is Rachel Hedman. I am the founding executive director of Story Crossroads. And what is really amazing is not only that we have Bradley tonight, but this is the 75th house concert. I mean, that's amazing. Oh, yes.
Rachel, we came up Crossroads Boulevard to get here. Did you have anything to say?
I have great pull. I mean, I don't know how many years that road's been around. I know we're going on our 9th festival, but I'm sure that even before I was born, I was planning things. You know, we just have to figure out what year that was named, that street. But yes, I do love it every time. There's been a few times that when there's a red light, I can't help it. I try to take a picture of that crossroads, but I try not, not in green, because that would be a bad example. But we are here. You made it here, and you also made it here. So congrats, you found the link, you found the stream. Now, a few things to know is that Story Crossroads, we have these house concerts. Why? Because we want people to experience the art. So for some of you, this might be your first time. So out of curiosity, first time, like never really gone to a storytelling thing. Okay, so we have some newbies. We love you. This is partly why we have it. And those who have been here before, who's been to a house concert before. Okay, so we have those who they know this world. And also we have not just the experience of the art, but it is also a fundraising series. Now we offer it so people can come whether or not they donate. That's just how it's always been, because we just want to make it easy for people to experience the art. However, a lot of you have already donated. And so, you know, whether that's PayPal, Venmo, cash check, I mean, all those things, what happens with that? Well, whatever we raise each time, half of it goes to Story Crossroads and half of it goes to our story artist, which tonight is Bradley Mackay. Now, you have to also know that we've had all this wonderful continuous funding with Story Crossroads. So besides individuals who help us, we also have the Utah Humanities help us a ton. We have the Zoo Arts and the Parks of Salt Lake County that helps us out. We have the Salt Lake City Arts Council. We have the Utah Division of Arts and Museums and the Western States Arts Federation, and on and on. It's just continuous funding, which has helped. And what's exciting is that in the last few years alone, a lot of those continuous funders have doubled what they've given to us. So I think they love what we're doing. And maybe after tonight, you'll be like, yeah, I think I love what they do too. And for those who are streaming, you can actually just go to thestorycrossroads.org/donate, and there's PayPal and Venmo options. But again, we have it possible so that whether or not you donate, we are glad you're experiencing the art. Now, Bradley, I could probably say a ton of things about him, but I know we want to get to the stories. But he has really delved into that theatrical world. In fact, you probably have seen him at the Hale Center Theater. I mean, even now at the Hale Center Theater. So he has all of this, but he also has delved into the storytelling world. So there are two different art forms, but he blends them so beautifully. And he actually will be presenting original stories. And this is geared for 10 and older, and I think everyone here is at least 10. Good. All right, so we're good there. And if you're watching and you're suddenly jumping into it, just, heads up, this is not really for the littles. We are not responsible for any nightmares. So that being said, we need him to be here at the stage. So of course we got to applaud.
Hello, everybody. So good to have you here. And I'm so grateful for my wife. She wanted to host this year, so she did all of this decor and she did a great job. If we could get around the front. The one part of it that was almost perfect. We were promised rain by the weatherman today, and it was all spent this morning. That atmosphere would have just been so perfect if there was just rain dripping down the windows. So I'm just gonna have to have you imagine that for now. So I was gonna write stories, but I got carried away and I just wrote one big story for tonight. I hope you like romance. I hope you like horror, because this is a blend of both of those. And I decided to pen this piece, The Vessels of Desire. Really fun. I hope you like it. So again, anyone, if it's your first time, imagine you're just like, I don't know, in the medieval ages, sitting around a fire, and you just see some bard come up telling a story. That's a lot of what these festivals are like. And yeah, so I'll just go right into it. So, dark night like this, rain falling on the manor in a village called Bran, B-R-A-N. And Darius puts his son inside the closet. He says, Adam, stay in here. Don't open the door. Don't come out. The closet door shuts. Adam is lying curled up in a ball on the floor. The only thing he could see is under the slit of the doorway. And he hears the large manor doors open to their house. He hears them shut. He hears a scuffle, and then he hears a thud, and then a as something rolls down the stairs. Adam's father, he could see under the door, has the rapier drawn, and he's bracing himself, waiting for the door to open. He hears the metal clink as the door knob slowly turns and opens. Adam's father lunges, but there's nothing there. But then from behind, something attacks his father. They're grappling around the room. They bump into a bar cart. It tips over, glasses shatter, and red wine spills across the floor and goes under the doorstep, pooling against Adam's face as he's laying there. Then he hears a thump, and he sees his father's lifeless eyes staring back at him from under the doorstep. Two red holes bore into his neck, his face pale. He then sees two black boots with golden buckles step by his father's face, facing the door. He holds his breath. The breathing through his nose is pushing the wine puddle that had been forming under the door. The boots stand there, considering, and Adam, terrified, just imagines. But the boots consider something, and instead a red rose drops in front of his father's face. The boots retreat. He hears the large manor doors open and then shut once again. Adam waited in that closet for several hours. He watched as each petal of the rose slowly wilted into the puddle of wine and lost all its vigor. He was finally found when the servants came looking for their master, his father, and they opened the closet door. They tried to clean him up. They tried to explain to him what would happen to his life now. And in a moment of chaos and the scuttle of everything moving around, he was left alone in the room. He picked up the rose that was in the puddle. Blood red wine dripping from the blood red rose onto his father's bloodless corpse. Adam would not forget this. Many years later, we are at a ball at Castle Bran. There are chandeliers hung on the ceiling, each clutching hundreds of candles, torches on the wall. There are lights plentiful, and the dancers are exquisite. The women in their ball gowns of reds and blues and greens, anytime they spin on the dance floor, their dresses flourish and then flourish back as they're spun back into their partners. And at the center of this dance is Lilith. She was the beauty of the ball. She would dance and her smile was beaming. Her dance partner felt like he was the luckiest man in the world to be dancing with her. And she also felt it. And she felt, as she looked into his eyes, I finally found true love. She takes him away from the dance, over onto the balcony where they're covered in moonlight, and she sways in his arms. She looks up into his eyes, and she, with her eyes, offers a kiss. He gets the message, and he leans in to kiss her. Her heart starts beating. She could feel warmth spreading through her chest. And she said, yes, I think I finally found it. But just before their lips touch, her fangs pop out and she sinks them deep into his neck. He struggles against her vainly, but as she sucks the blood out of him, his strength leaves him and he collapses onto the floor. Lilith wipes the blood from her lips, flicks it onto the floor, and thinks, oh, not again. How many times would she mistake her bloodlust for love? Irritated at herself, chiding herself, she left her poor date on the floor, bloodless, and returned to the ball. She poured herself a glass of wine and drank it all in one go, and then returned to the dance where vampires cheered her everywhere, as many of them had also done the same. This was a vampire masquerade. Lilith returned to the dancing, frantically leaping from one partner to another with a zeal for life and a zeal of insatiable desire, constantly moving her from one partner to the next and to the next, spinning with her red dress that draped across her shoulders. She looked like a rose blossoming on the floor. There was, however, one dance partner that she pointedly avoided, but yet as the night crept on, this partner crept closer. His black boots with gold buckles came to her. Everyone on the dance floor parted so that he could walk through him. Vlad, the Lord of Castle Brand, approached Lilith, and he held out his arm. Lilith could not refuse the Lord to dance, and so stubbornly she reached her hand back out to his, and they started to dance again. They spun around the room, and Vlad, overconfident in both his expression and the way he spoke, told her, Lilith, we've known each other for hundreds of years. I think it is now time for you to come back to me. She spun her out and spun her back in, holding her close to his body as she looked to him over her shoulder. And she said, no, I don't think so. He laughed and said, Lilith, I thought these years would humble you, but it looks like they have not. Have you found what you've been looking for? Have you, Lilith? I'm afraid your passions and desires will always get the best of you. And until you learn to be humble enough to come back to me, you're banished from these balls. He dropped her hand and she looked at him furious. And he says, you are now on servant duty. You will be collecting tribute with the other servant vampires until you are ready to accept my offer. She turned away from him, leaving the room, and he said, Lilith. She stopped and looked back at him and he said, next time I will not be asking. She grabbed another glass of wine, drank it in one go, threw the glass onto the floor, and left. She changed into her servant clothes, and then with the other servant vampires, Stefan and Andre, they flew to the village of Gran. Now, down in the village, in the town square, the village had set up stocks. Sorry about those plosives there. The village had set up stocks right in the center of town square. And this is where they would offer tribute to Vlad the Vampire Lord. And in these stocks was a poor gentleman, and when the vampires descended, their wings fluttering, he began to panic and to writhe in the stocks, but there was no escape. The moonlight paved the cobblestones pearl of this town center as they all landed there. And as the man began to frantically try to jostle himself out of the stocks, Lilith immediately pounced over him, still controlled by some bloodlust, some frenzy, and she drank the blood out of him right there on the spot and left him to die. Lilith, Stefan had said, that is not for you. Where are we supposed to find another tribute at night like this? Vlad will be furious. What have you done? Andre, the other vampire, stepped in and said, enough. calm down. We need to find something quick. Stefan, you go search the west road. I will search the east road. Lilith, you scour around the town, find anyone who is stupid enough to go out of doors. We need a new replacement. And Lilith, keep your fangs to yourself. The two vampires turned into bats and flew away, leaving Lilith in the town square. She was so frustrated at herself. This was the second drink she had had this night, and still she just felt unsatisfied, like nothing would be able to quench her thirst. She scampered around the town looking when, through an alleyway, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a cloaked figure dash by. So she turned, and the hunt was on. She crept through the alleyway, following this figure. They darted through the town, behind buildings, behind alleyways, down a dirt road until they reached a watermill. And she could hear the cool sound of the river flowing and the sound of the mill churning the water as it spun. The cloaked figure stepped up the porch steps to the watermill, and then she saw it collapse onto the floor, just its ankle poking out. Easy, Lilith thought, and she went up to the door. She wasn't sure how she was going to move the body. Vampires cannot enter an abode without an invitation, you see. That bloodlust called her again, and she thought, no, fine. And she bit into the ankle to try and suck blood out of one more thing. Maybe this time she'd be satisfied. But when she bit, her hair stood on end, and she was electrified. She fell down the porch steps onto the ground. She looked up confused. That had never happened before, ever. She went up to the figure and looked at the ankle where she had just bit, and there was no blood pooling at the wound. Instead, she could just see sparks of electricity occasionally darting through the open area. What is this? She looked at it and then tried to peer under its hood without going in through the door, as there was a force preventing her from entering. And under the hood, she did see a handsome face. She didn't know what this was, but something in the back of her mind told her there was an opportunity here. If this creature had no blood, she could have no bloodlust for it. And maybe, just maybe, she could find blood. She retracted her teeth. She dusted the dirt off her face. She tried to look as human as possible, and she tried to rouse the figure. She said, "Excuse me, hello, sir. Do you need help?" The figure stirred. "Hello, sir. Do you need help? Can I come in to help you?" Very cleverly disguised way asking for an invitation. The figure weakly nodded. She walked inside. The figure tried to put itself on its hands and knees, but it was very weak. She said, "What do you need?" He pointed off into the corner. Inside the mill, there was the spinning round table and the gear from outside that was causing all the machinery to turn. And next to it was some kind of machine with a large black cable. And this was what the creature was gesturing towards. So she grabbed the end of it and brought it over to him. And he grabbed it, leaning himself against the wall, and says, "You might want to leave." She said, No, I'm curious." He pulled over his cloak, and on his shoulder, she could see a socket. He grabbed the cable and he had plugged the cable into his own shoulder. The creature seemed to visibly relax and leaned against the wall. He was looking at him, and she said, "What are you?" He looked at her and said, "Do you promise not to run?" He pulled off the cloak over his face, and she saw that handsome face before her. It was remarkable. He had very pale skin, and he had green eyes, deep green eyes. But the most striking feature on his face was lines of stitching all over it, as if he was only held together by threads. As he removed the rest of the cloak, she could see that the stitching continued all over his body, and she had to hold back a bit of revulsion, as the body didn't look like it belonged to itself, as some of the limbs were disproportionate to the others. She wanted to leave, but she held herself still as she looked at him. Good job. That's when most people would leave. She looked at him and she said, "Who did this to you?" And he said, "I did." She thought about it for a moment. She had so many questions for him, and he seemed to have a respect for her for not leaving, but she could see the sun slowly start to come up over the hill. She could hear the morning bells ringing, and she realized she was out of time. She couldn't be in sunlight. She went over the door, turned back to him and said, "If I ever need to find you again, is this a good place to find you?" And he looked at her and said, "Why?" She said, "Is this a good place to find you?" "Yes." "What's your name?" "Adam." "Yours?" "Lilith." The bell tolled again, and she had to leave. She was out of time. So she flew, well, she got a clear distance away where he could see her transform into a vampire and fly away. But as she did so, from behind her, she could hear him playing with her name. Lilith. Lilith. She smiled. She flew back to Castle Brand just in the nick of time before the sun came up and would burn her alive. There she met with Stefan, and he said, "Did you find anything?" She said, "No." He said, "Well, you're lucky I did. If you do that again, I will kill you." "Now, where's Andre? Have you seen him?" "No." "Did you not meet back up with him?" "No." The next night, they looked as far and wide as they could, but there was no sign of the other servant vampire who was with them that night. It started to worry Lilith a little bit, but what could you do? Sometimes vampires chose to wander out alone. The next night, Lilith, as soon as she was able, crept back over to the watermill looking for Adam. While she was inside the watermill, she got there before he did. She decided to do some snooping to see what she could learn about this man. So she made some mental notes looking around the place. Dirty, she thought, but tidy. He's organized. That's good. She looked around some more. She saw a desk full of notes. Intelligent. Very nice. She kept looking around. She saw a chest that was locked. She grabbed a nearby needle, picked the lock, opened it, and when she looked in the chest, she found a sort of velvety pouch. "A collector?" she thought. She picked up the pouch, and it jangled as if there were keys or something inside. But before she could open it, she turned and she saw Adam staring at her through the doorway. She threw it down, slammed the lid of the trunk closed, and looked at him and said, "You are late." He said, "What?" That was the last thing he expected to be chided for when she was snooping through his things. But she said, "You are late. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting here for you? You're not supposed to keep a girl waiting. You realize that I don't have all the time in the world to be here for you?" He thought, "Then why are you here?" She paced around the room, brushing her fingers against the walls because she wasn't quite ready to answer that question. So she said, "I want to ask you a question first. I came here to know what kind of a man would do this to himself." This, gesturing to all his grotesque stitching. He lumbered into the room, grabbed the cable again, and plugged it back in, and relaxed against the wall as he talked to her. He said, "A man with more person, more purpose in him than person. I've dedicated myself to a cause for so long that there's so little of me left, both inside and out. Now why did you come back?" Did you come for a show? Did you come to sate your curiosity? What did she tell him though? Could she tell him that he might be her only chance of finding true love, whether or not she could with him or not, because no one else had survived? Could she tell him that she needed a monster to prove that she wasn't one anymore? She couldn't quite tell him that either. So she smiled and looked at him and said, I know what it's like to feel like a monster too. That seemed to sate his curiosity, so he nodded and sat down. But of course, he was so late that the morning bell began to toll, and she thought, oh, I'm never going to get to know this man. She thought, I need to come back and see you again. But Adam doesn't work as a name for you. I don't like it. And he thought, why not? I'm going to call you Patch. Patch? Yes, you look like a patchwork quilt, but with like human bodies. I think it fits. Shook his head and thought, fine. I will be here tomorrow night. You'll be on time? Yes. Good. And so she left. And eagerly the next night came, and just as promised, Adam was there on time, and Lilith came. They got to know each other. He, of course, had to plug himself back in. She wasn't exactly sure what it did or how long he needed to do that for. But every time they visited, that's what he would do. She got to learn a lot about him. They didn't talk as much as she had talked with her other dates. And yet she felt like she got to know him better than them. Just sitting in his company, she could feel feelings he was feeling. And she felt that he did the same as well. One of these nights, she got the courage to teach him to dance. It was horribly uncoordinated with such a disproportionate creature, which was funny to watch, but she still liked swaying in his arms and looking into his eyes. But that night, just as that happened, something took over him. There was a rage about him. He started to storm about the room. He yanked the plug from out of his socket. She said, what's going on? He's like, he stormed outside and started to bash his fists against a tree. The bark on the tree just splintered with every impact that he did. And then he began to push, and she could see the tree starting to tilt, this massive tree. And the ground beneath him was shaking and trembling. The tree was moaning as it began to like bend and tilt with the pressure that he put into it, until finally he collapsed down on the ground. She said, what was that? Overcharged, he said, gesturing towards the device. Had to get it out. She smiled at him. Will you come dance with me at Castle Brennan? No. What? Why not? No. Fine. I still want to dance with you. Up on the hill tomorrow night, midnight. You'll be on time? I'll be on time, he said. She smiled and flitted away. She could feel her heart beating, and this time it was her playing with his name. That night, or that day rather, for Vampire, she dreamt very well in her coffin. She dreamt of Adam and her dancing. She saw her red dress flourishing as he spun her about the room. She saw them sneaking out to the balcony, the moonlight bathing their skin. She could feel herself swaying in his arms, leaning her head against his chest and hearing his heartbeat. And she looked up, offered a kiss. He received the message and started to lean in. This time her fangs wouldn't pop out. This time she could know if she had found love or not. And the feeling was so exciting. But just before their lips touched, Vlad woke her up. Lilith. What are you doing here? This is my coffin. I don't remember yours being next to mine. I was checking in on my favorite servant. Tell me, how does the servant life treat you? Do you miss the balls? He gloated over her. She could just feel his arrogance dripping from every pore of his body, and she hated it. It was awful. She said, no, actually, servant life is just fine. I'm getting along just fine. Are you? You seem to be dancing in your sleep. Also, I came to warn you, it doesn't seem that your servant life is safe anymore. Safe? What do you mean? Has Andre ever returned? She'd forgotten. She'd spent so many of the past nights with Adam and Patch, she called him, that she'd forgotten that he was missing. She said, no, has he turned up? Vlad smiled. What about Stefan? Have you heard from him lately? Is Stefan missing too? Where is he? Vlad smiled. Little Miss Lilith, do you know why you feel safe? Why you feel invincible? Come with me. I have something to show you. They flew off that night to the East Road where Andre last went searching for the tribute. When they landed into the clearing, it was just the two of them. Vlad chuckled to himself and then sat on a rock, waiting for her to discover something. She looked around aimlessly and thought, what am I supposed to be looking for? Andre? Andre, are you here? She caught Vlad's eye, and he gestured over to a signpost. She looked over, walked towards it. There at the base of the signpost was a skull, a vampire skull. She reached closer towards it, and she could sense that this was Andre's. But the fangs were missing. Where's the rest of them? She asked. She looked up into the trees and regretted doing so. Who could have done this? She looked around at the trees. The trees in the road all seemed to bend, as if they were greedy hands clutching and protecting the road. She could see on the bark of one of the trees that it had all been shattered and splintered off. She thought, where's Stefan? This way. That led her into a tower overlooking the town center of the village of Bran. From inside, they could see that the tribute was in the stocks, except for it wasn't a tribute. Stefan, she said. Vlad held her back. Oh, no, no. The morning light is almost here. We aren't getting out of here. You will watch. What? We can help him. No, you will watch. She tried to squint her eyes down at him, and she could see that he too, trapped in the stocks, had his fangs removed. She watched in horror as the morning bell tolled and sunlight crept over the hill, the rays of light piercing right into the town's center. She remembered his screams forever, though it didn't last long. When it was finally over, there was nothing left but bones in the stocks. Vampire cannot endure sunlight. Vlad turned to her. Do you know why you are safe, Lilith? You are safe because I keep you safe. I keep this village on its knees so they don't dare fight against us. It's time for them to need a reminder, but you also need the reminder that you are safe because of my good graces and my good graces only. Tonight, we will go back to the castle and you will wed me and be by my side for the rest of our death. You will be safe. Vlad left her in the tower and he flew back under the shade of the East Road to the castle. Lilith was in a stupor, having seen two of her close vampire friends die. And their fangs. What kind of creature would collect their fangs? Then she remembered the trees, and she had to know. The town was ablaze with confusion, panic, and triumph even as they saw the skeleton in the stocks. They weren't sure which one of them had the courage to do this thing, but they felt hope and despair simultaneously. There would surely be retaliation. Lilith crept through the clouds, cuddling close to the shade as best as she could to avoid getting burned. She made her way through the trees, down the dirt hill to the watermill, and she dashed inside before the sunlight could get her and closed the door. There inside, she saw the spinning machinery. As before, she saw the machine, but she went directly to the trunk that she had seen previously. She opened it up, having to unlock it again, and she looked at that velvety couch that she had seen before. She picked it up. It jangled like keys. She knew what she would find inside, but she didn't want to. But she had to know. So she opened it and saw a large collection of fangs jostling in the bag. She dropped it, and the fangs cluttered and spilled all over inside the trunk and onto the floor behind her. She tried to run to the door. No, this can't be. It can't be Adam. But when she tried to leave, sunlight pierced through the windows, preventing her escape. She huddled against the corner, hiding away from the sunlight as it crawled towards her feet. She was huddled all the way in the corner. And then the door opened and then closed. She was trapped in here with the monster. A monster she knew and was starting to love, but a monster nonetheless. She heard big hulking footsteps. Making its way over to the trunk. She had left the lid open. Then what am I going to do? I can't hide. The sunlight's here. He's going to find out. But he didn't seem to be going to the trunk. His feet stopped in front of a desk. His figure was blocking the sunlight, and she thought, now is my only chance. So she tried to dash out and out through the door, but instead she crashed right into the back of his body and fell to the floor. He turned to look at her, and then the sunlight, hidden by his silhouette, pierced through and hit her cheek. It burned. She shrieked and dashed back into the corner away. Her fangs were out. Her skin was charred by the sunlight, and she could no longer hide what she truly was from him. She stood amidst spilled vampire fangs over the floor, trapped by a cage of sunlight, as Adam, the hulking brute, stood on the opposite side. Lilith, he said. She looked at him. He was dressed in a black suit tailcoat, and he had a gentleman's hat. It didn't quite fit on his imbalanced head, but the gesture was there, and he was holding a rose in his hand. And next to his desk, she could also see a dried out rose hanging as if it had been there for years. Lilith, what? Yes, she said, I'm a monster. But so are you. I know what you've done, gesturing to the fangs all over the floor. I know that you killed my friends. You're a monster, she said. He dropped his rose to the floor, took a step closer towards her. I'm a monster. Me. You are calling me a monster, Lilith. He took off his tailcoat. He ripped open his shirt so she could see the stitching all over him. He says, how many of me do you recognize? She was thrown off by his strange question, but he repeated it. How many of me do you recognize? See this arm? This was from a vampire's victim from a wall. You see this leg? This was from a traveler murdered on the road. Vampire fangs bore into his neck. This arm, this is my father's own arm, killed by a vampire in our own home. You call me a monster? Every vampire killed avenges hundreds of lives. How many of you killed, Lilith? You've been alive for 100 or more years. How many people do you have to kill regularly to satiate your bloodlust? Call me a monster for desecrating these dead bodies as I have. Call me a monster for sewing myself into one. Call me a monster for any good reason, but not for this. We are monsters on equal terms. I will not be insulted like this. She looked at him, panic rising. What happened now? Would he kill her? He looked down at the rose that he had thrown onto the floor. He looked over to the rose that was dried out. That was from the night my father was killed, he said. This, picking up the other rose, was for tonight. I thought I found new life with you, Lilith. Crumbled onto his knees. I've been pursuing revenge so long, I don't know what I am anymore. Her heart softened looking at him, looking at how he had gotten himself ready for the dance that she had wanted. She held out her hand to him. He held out his hand, well, his father's hand back. They both had the thought at the same time and couldn't touch anymore. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. She remembered the dream she had of finally waltzing with Adam and how it all just came crashing. It was over. They couldn't go forward from here. How could they? He killed her kind. She killed his. He was a walking patchwork of her victims. And now that she knew, she could never get over it. They sat there kneeling on the floor across from each other, two hearts destined to be together in a world that prevented them from being so. Adam looked at her, and he began to pull open the stitching that covered his heart. She wasn't sure what the gesture meant, but she watched as he continued to pull the thread out until the flesh over his heart opened. And she looked and she didn't see a heart. It was a generator, something with motors and electricity constantly spinning. She looked at his eyes, his green eyes, and back at the motor, trying to understand what he was asking of her. She reached out, touching him, when they heard a bell toll. They looked out the window and they could see smoke rising from the town. Little thought. Adam got up. He says, "Oh no, they're in trouble." And he started to stitch himself up. Lilith saw very many images running through her brain all at once. If Adam went into the town and started killing more of her vampires who were attacking the village, she wasn't sure which side she was on. She didn't want to find out. She sharpened her claws and looked over at that mechanical device in the corner. Lilith, don't. She flashed the cable clean on. No! Adam yelled. Lilith tackled into the floor and she started to attack him. She hated every part of her being while she did so, but she hurt him, knowing she had to protect her family if she could. She wasn't sure what mattered more, this man or them, but their love could never be together anymore. Once he was motionless on the floor, just barely breathing, she looked at that heart that was still exposed. She had to do it, but she couldn't make herself do it. But then the building they were in caught fire as well. Large beams fell around them, and she realized she didn't have to. Tears in her eyes, she leaned over and she kissed Adam's lips, the kiss that she wished she could have had, the love she wished she could have fulfilled, but once again, she was destined to destroy it. "Sorry, Adam," she said, and then she left. As she walked away, she saw the beams pin Adam down, his body limping, vainly struggling against it as the building completely caught ablaze. She returned to the town square at night. Rooftops were covered with flames. A vampire trick. If you can't be invited indoors, make them come out. As the people ran out of the doors, they were greeted by happy vampires who were ready to suck the blood right out of them. There was a pile of people in the streets, right in the town center, covering the stocks. Vlad had a message to send. He found Lilith, and he held his arms open to her. Lilith, come. Let's put the color back into your face. We will take some of these prey back to our castle and have a feast of 1,000 lifetimes. And then we will wed. It began to rain. Vlad and other vampires back called into the night as they took their victims up to the castle. The village was still. There was only the sound of fire crackling on a thatched roof, rain burning into steam as it hit the flames, and Lilith weeping quietly into the night. That night at Castle Grand, there was a bigger ball and bigger feast than there had ever been before. They would dance, dresses flourishing as they did so, and Lilith was dancing with Vlad all night. But her gaze was idle and she was looking elsewhere, just watching her life go by, empty. Her bloodlust had finally left her, but so had all the other zeal and passion that she had had for life. She walked away to the balcony on her own, leaving Vlad behind to think of the events, and she looked out the window towards the watermill, if she could try and see it, but only saw a mountain of smoke. The rain was falling hard, and there was lightning dashing across the sky. She leaned her forehead against the glass window, feeling the cool glass on her forehead. She could hear the water droplets thumping against the window, and she watched the droplets as they lazily rolled, zagged, met together, and then continued to roll down the window. She wasn't ready to live any longer than she had. How long had it been? The thunder finally rumbled back from that lightning strike before, and then there was another lightning strike. Well, she grabbed a glass of wine. To an eternity of being the lady of Castle Glenelg. She put the glass to her lips and started to drink when another flash of lightning dashed across the window. But there was something strange about it. She peered closer, watching at the point of impact. The next flash of lightning that came went to exactly the same spot. And the next one, and the next one, next one. She fell. She scurried back into the ballroom. She ran up to Vlad. Vlad, something's wrong, please. We have to get everyone out of here. No, the dance will continue. The feast will continue, Lilith. There is nothing to fear. We have put the village down. No, Vlad, you don't understand. Something is coming. Something charged. You can't, we gotta get out of here. She took him to the window and he saw the lightning striking all at one point. They could see a figure, glowing blue, starting to march towards the castle, each step shaking the ground. Vlad understood. He said, Lilith, take some of the other vampires hiding here. He pushed them into the door. He said, don't open the door. Stay in here. Vampires from all over the castle were huddled near the front gates. Morning was coming upon them soon, so there was nowhere for them to run. They had to fight here or hide here, but that was all they could do. They waited several tense minutes, just hearing the ground shake. Something approached. Hit the gates. Rattled the stone walls, dust fell from the ceiling onto him. Some of the vampires whimpered in fear. She had seen him in this fury once before when he had an overcharge. That was a small charge. Would there be anything left in that man? Part of her heart was happy that Adam was alive, but the rest of her knew that's not Adam anymore. There was a huge sound of iron screeching as it was tore apart. That must have been the gates going down. There was a cloud of noise as if hundreds of bats were swarming a single target. They listened to the sound for a while, and then slowly the sound began to dilute and get quieter, quieter, until everything was quiet. Lilith walked to the door. She crouched under it so she could see just under the slit of the door, trying to find what was going on. She couldn't see much, but she thought she saw something thumped against the door. She recoiled, and then it slid down, and she saw a carcass of a vampire that had been thrown against the door. She held her mouth shut and went to the back of the room, her back pressed all the way against the curtains. You could see the doorknob turn slowly. One of the vampires next to her began to cry, so she covered her mouth. But then they brushed against the curtain, and sunlight peered in and singed her shoulder. She shrieked. The door burst open. Vampires shrieked and flew all about the room as the hulking figure of Adam was in the doorway. Lilith dodged underneath. Some of the vampires tried to fly overhead, but he caught them by the ankle, and she didn't know what happened after that. They were chased through the hall. She flew and flew as hard as she could, other vampires around her, but slowly she saw from her peripheral vision, that one plucked off, that one plucked off, until it was just her. She made her way back into the main ballroom, where she saw the giant iron doors in the middle of the floor. She looked around. It was like a graveyard where no one had bothered to bury the dead. She flew down to the floor and looked around when from the balcony he heard Lilith. Walked from the top of the balcony and then he jumped down, the whole floor shaking. She held her breath and backed away. He came and said as he walked closer. His eyes were no longer a pale green, they were glowing blue with energy. And then another vampire came and tackled Adam. He fell onto the floor, and she saw that Vlad, the Lord of Castle Grand, was still alive. They started to fight viciously, Vlad clawing against his face and Adam shrieking as his big arms started to swing in the air and miss. Vlad flew around the room and then with a dashing maneuver cut right over at the stitching, which opened the vein of his heart. Vlad eyed the generator and then eyed the panic in Adam's eyes. Adam began to grab big chunks of stone from the floor, throw them as they would hit the columns. And then finally, as Vlad charged directly at Adam, the stone connected and he fell onto the floor. Adam walked closer. He looked down at the boots on his vampire, and he remembered the boots that had haunted his dreams for years. And he said, I know who you are. He picked up the vampire by the collar and said, you killed my father, and tonight you will die by his hand. He put his hand over Vlad's face and pried open his mouth. No, Adam, don't! Lilith shouted from across the floor, but he couldn't hear. Vlad was grasping against Adam's powerful hands, but to no avail. Lilith found a rapier on the floor, and she looked at the open heart of Adam. And she thought, well, I've always been good at killing the people I love. Looks like tonight's no exception. She picked up the rapier and looked at Adam, looked at the only chance that she had had for love in hundreds of years, and thought maybe she could save both of them from being monsters tonight. So with the rapier drawn, she lunged towards him. Adam's face turned and they met eyes as she looked directly at him, ready to plunge it into his heart. Several hours went by. Adam sat on the floor, holding a skeleton that had been burned in the sunlight in his arms. Just before Lilith was able to connect, sun pierced through the doors that had been burst open. And light had claimed Lilith before Adam's rage could. He held her in his arms. Next to him was a velvety pouch filled to the brim with vampire fangs. He had collected all of them tonight, topped with the crown jewels of Vlad the Vampire Lords into the pouch. He looked at Lilith's fangs still in her skull. Decided not to take them. He gently laid the bones down onto the floor. He walked over to a bar cart, filled up a glass of wine, and drank. The red wine poured out through the gashes in his body that had been formed from hunting hundreds of vampires that night. He could retain nothing. He couldn't retain wine, rage, joy, or love. And would go on to live empty. Thank you.
Wow. And what can I even say after that? All the imagery here. And again, we're not responsible for any nightmares, including for adults. Wow. And that was a premiere too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a premiere, everyone, that you got to experience. And wasn't that just fantastic? You know, here I knew it was going to be wonderful. And look what we got. Just I'm kind of speechless, so I think applause is good when speechless. And really just how special that is to have that be our 75th house concert. And not only thankful to Bradley tonight, but also to all the Mackay households here, because they're hosting. This is their lovely home here, and there'll be some refreshments and things there too. For those with the live stream, or I know there'll be people who will be watching it after the live stream, you can still maybe get yourself a snack or treat at your own home and feel like you also got to have that. I can already see there's some of the comments there, which hold on, let me just double check. We have lots of applause and thank you and wonderful things there. And just a reminder, there will be more. So this may be the 75th house concert, but wait, there's more. We're not going to stop at 75. Of course not. I mean, we're going to eventually get to 100 and 200 and so forth, right? So the next one to put on your calendar is another Thursday night, which will be November 30th. So right over there, there will be something you can take a picture of, and we will have Ramona Lucius with Hands-On Folktales do an amazing piece. And it's actually called We're Better Together. And there'll be all kinds of stories that really celebrate kindness and collaboration and working together of various kinds. And so I'm excited for her to join us for that 76th one. In fact, is that what you have? You have, oh, yeah. Yes. Well, there's the November 30th, but if you didn't know already, Bradley has a podcast. And how many episodes do you have now? I'm gonna have you take the mic and explain your podcast.
Yeah, I'll kind of explain what's over on that table. So on the table there's a bunch of little papers with QR codes and whatnot. There's one for the next house concert she just mentioned. And there's also like some donation links. This one's my podcast here. It's called Immersive Storytelling Podcast. Right now it's just on Spotify, but it's got these stories. I'm gonna, once I record this one, after I polish it up with writing, I'll put this one on there. And there's also The Witch in the Stone Boat, which is one I've told at a Halloween concert previous year. So feel free to take a listen on that. It's free and there's no ads yet. So but yeah, for everyone that's here, thank you so much. And my wife's got some delicious treats. Among them, I just have to brag, chocolate biscuit cake is one of those. So she makes some fancy stuff. So yeah. feel free to dig in and enjoy. Anything else you wanted to throw in? Okay.
Besides, all these wonderful things, you can see them at the table over there. But we actually have Story Crossroads bookmarks. And there's a QR code that if you scan it, it actually will go to our one stop. And why do you want to go to our one stop? Because then not only is there a donation part on there, but there's also our upcoming events. We do at least 2 events every month. We have virtual workshop series, we have the house concert series, and then once a year is our festival. So if you keep it on your refrigerator and every so often you're like, I need Story, because I know that's what you're thinking. You can go over to that and scan the QR code and find out, oh, this is what's coming up next. I'm going to be there, right? Or you're going to tell everyone else there too. So make sure that you grab that as well. And for the live stream people, I'm going to share the screen so that you can see the next house concert, right? Yeah. So now go for it if you dare. So